We have with us today Liz Sandals, who is Minister of Education, Ontario. Um, Minister, welcome to NewsBee.
I'm
Media
delighted to
Network.
be here. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, thank you. Uh, First of all, Minister, congratulations on taking a bigger responsibility in the government of Ontario. We know you were the Member of Parliament for some time. You did a great job for Guelph. And now, when you took over as a Minister for Education, I think at that particular time, nobody wanted that position. It was just a burning chair.
Well, actually, I'm delighted to have the position because my background before I was an MPP, I was a school board trustee for 15 years. I'd actually been Premier Wynn's parliamentary assistant at the Minister of Education the whole time she was Minister of Education. So it's actually a file that I really know quite well, and that's sort of my passion is education. So I'm just thrilled to be the Minister of Education.
That's really great. But you handled the thing as if it was a piece of cake for you. Did you already plan something? Because we know that there were some issues. The teachers had actually come up to your office and in your Ontario parliamentary office. At that time, did you have any inclination that you're going to be the Minister of Finance? Was there some discussions?
Well, the only time that you know that you're going to be the Minister of anything is when you get the call from the Premier, because it's the Premier is 100% the authority on who appoints people to cabinet. So you know you're going to be in cabinet when you get the call. But having said that, it was very clear during Premier Wynn's leadership campaign, and I totally agreed with her, that's why I supported her, that we need to find a way to work more collaboratively with all our education partners, and that we were willing to look at some of the agreements that had been imposed and see if there were any areas where we could fine-tune the agreements to make them a little bit more acceptable to the unions. And that's what we did. We sat down with each union, and it was actually quite a long process because the public was interested in the first conversation and the ratification of the first agreement, and then sort of didn't take as much interest. In fact, the discussions with different unions and fine-tuning different agreements actually went on for several months. But by this spring, we'd worked through all the different unions in all of Ontario education and concluded slightly adjusted agreements with each one of them. So I'm very optimistic that when we start the school year in September 2013, that hopefully we should be in a happier school year than we had in September 2012.
Oh, absolutely, and really congratulations. I think you handled it pretty well. When you took over as Education Minister, so this was a piece of cake, as I said, you just sorted out.
Well, it wasn't a piece of cake, but
that's what we felt like, because
well, I'm glad you felt that way.
and the public of Canada, of course. Now, when you took over as the Education Minister, did you have in mind that these are the objectives what I'm going to achieve? And we know that it's still, it's not a very long time that you have been the Education Minister still, and the elections are pretty going to be after a few months. Did you have any, do you have any unfinished job? Or?
Well, actually there's a whole list of things that I'm interested in doing and that are in progress and that we're working on. One of the things that I'd been interested in for years, because as I said I had a background in education, was the way teacher education works, so the way people become qualified to be teachers in Ontario. So we've already announced that we're making some quite significant changes in the way teacher education will work in Ontario in the future. So that's something that, while the implementation of those policy changes will be ongoing for the next few years, that was one of the pieces that we did up front. Here's the change. One of the things we talked about the labor relations difficulties, and one of the problems with labor relations in Ontario is that the legislation is about 20 years out of date and doesn't really recognize the roles that different parties play, because the province of Ontario is now the total funder of education, essentially. School boards are the employer, and obviously the unions represent the teachers and other education workers. But the actual legislation doesn't have any role for the government legally at the bargaining table, and we need to fix that. So one of my first priorities this fall will actually be to table legislation that does a better job of setting out the role of the parties in collective bargaining. Hopefully, if we have a better process, then we will have an outcome that will work more smoothly in the future and avoid the sort of large-scale disruption that we had last year. But so that will be high on my priority list.
Okay.
A couple of other things, though, that I'm quite interested in. One is the teaching of math in Ontario. My actual professional background is math and computer science. And math is one subject area where we don't do as well as we could in Ontario. We can still do better. So one of my priorities is working on improving student achievement in mathematics, looking at how we can do that. Another area which might not occur so much to your listeners is that the First Nations people, the Aboriginal people in Ontario, their children lag behind other students in Ontario in terms of their achievement, and that's a pretty well recognized gap that's been there for years and years and years and years. We need to make sure that our Aboriginal students are performing at the same level as all the other students in Ontario. So that's something that we've been talking to our First Nations people and working on that. So lots of projects going on. Another thing, I've actually got childcare in my ministry.
Oh, that's great.
That is not just elementary and secondary, I've got childcare as well. So we're also reviewing the childcare legislation and policy, and we're going to be doing a lot of work on updating that over the next year.
That's really great. I was on your website, and I think you have already achieved a great amount on the Aboriginals education part. Coming back to your math, actually, math is not very many people like math because it is one of the toughest subjects, I think.
Well, and interestingly with math, part of the problem is people don't like math.
That's
so part of the issue is actually to engage not just students but also teachers in being enthusiastic about math and actually wanting to do math instead of looking on it as a chore that we don't really want to do.
I think you are actually helping the economy too in a way, or the finance ministry, because right now globally economy it's melting almost everywhere, and people need to save, so they need to be good in math, right? Calculations. So that's a good contribution.
And actually, that's something that we're introducing more of into the curriculum, is what we call financial literacy, because students in Canada really don't learn about mortgages and banking and loans and how to manage your own finances and how to make investments. So that's actually something we want to, it sort of comes under life skills, but it's certainly modern world essential life skills. So we need to do a better job of teaching our students about financial literacy for everyday living.
I think it's a great vision, Minister, you have. It's just like in a family. I think the priority what the parents give is education to the children. Yeah. They just feel if a child is well educated, he has achieved 75% of the success. So I think Canada is lucky to have, Ontario, I should say Canada is lucky to have a minister like you, because You never know, we might see you in the federal, right? Soon. So,
Actually, you know, the interesting thing is people will often say to me, would you like to be in the federal government? And the truth is no, I've never been interested in the federal government because the portfolios I'm really interested in are education and health, and those are actually provincial responsibilities. So I'm really very happy
Right.
at the provincial
At the provincial
level
level.
because that's where my issues are.
that's great, but maybe they should do something, some position at the federal level, because right now you are looking after the education of Ontario, and of course we know, I think Ontario is on the top right now. So somehow others need to learn from you.
Well,
That's what I think.
actually, what happens is that all the ministers of education from all the provinces and territories get together, and we do work together on priorities. So, for example, I mentioned closing the gap with Aboriginal students. That's a problem all across Canada.
Right.
So it's an area where all the ministers across Canada agreed we have to work together. The teaching of math is another area where we all agree we can do better than we are right now. So again, we're all agreed that we can work together and share best practice. So there actually is cooperation amongst ministers across
Okay.
provinces.
Across provinces.
It isn't driven by the federal government though.
Right.
It's us voluntarily working
But do you
together.
think it goes okay in case we know that in British Columbia and Ontario the Liberals are in power? Do you think the coordination is smooth even if the other province has a government from the other political party?
Actually, I would say that, so for example, when we met in July with the ministers all across Canada, there weren't a lot of discussions we had where things started to break down along party lines. There really were people just saying, here's the issue in education in my province, and looking at how we could learn from each other and share our good ideas with each other, and build on the work that each other does. So it really didn't seem to be in education a partisan discussion.
Now, since we are discussing this issue of teachers training, before I came in here, I met few South Asians who are actually fewer in the teaching, in the teaching profession, I should say. Do you think in Guelph and in Ontario, the proportion of South Asian teachers, is it going down or is it appropriate? Do you think so? Or are you doing something to bring in to a level which you feel is acceptable?
We would absolutely love to have a more diverse teaching population. What is happening right now is that because in the last few years the number of children in Ontario has actually gone down, that the demand for new teachers has gone down. So that if you look at our teaching workforce at the moment, it tends to be aging. There haven't been a lot of opportunity for new teachers. So hopefully in a few years our student population will start to grow again, and that as we see more positions open up, then we'll hope that the graduates from our Ontario teacher colleges are more diverse. And given that, for example, a lot of South Asian students have stellar academic records, there's no reason that if they want to go to an Ontario faculty of education that they wouldn't get in. So we should see, I think what I see is more young teachers reflecting the diversity of Ontario, more so than the older teachers, and that's just an evolution of the population.
Right. Minister, as you know, I think there's the issue of equivalency. When I say equivalency is people immigrate from the other countries, some are MBAs, some are MBBS, the doctors, and when they immigrate, after immigrating here, some of them are driving taxis, or most of them, I should say, are underemployed.
Yeah.
So, are you taking any initiatives to recognize those particular qualifications or a shorter method where the people don't have to struggle for years together? In some short time, they should be able to get the equivalency to the Canadian.
So we've done a couple of things. In our last term under Premier McGuinty, we actually brought in some legislation that applies to professional colleges. And so that legislation said that colleges can't set up artificial barriers, artificial requirements against people who have been trained in other countries. The other thing that we did was we set up for most professions courses that are offered in Ontario for people who have been trained somewhere else in the world to take the course, and to do a sort of a bridging course and get the material that would be different from what they'd learned in their own country. Because I'm in Guelph, the one I'm most familiar with is actually the bridging course for veterinarians that is offered right here in Guelph. And that's been very successful because, of course, with veterinary medicine, the diseases and the cultural treatment of animals is often quite different than Ontario agriculture, because the climate's different, the culture's historically different. So that course has been, the bridging course for veterinarians has been very successful in helping to get people who may be trained in Asia, South America, all over the world, so that they can be licensed in Ontario.
The next question of mine actually, Minister, relates to your role as a MP in Guelph. Actually, I have had this question with the mayor, also with Mr. Frank Valeriet, who is a member of parliament. We have statistics that before 10 years, the immigrants who were here were underqualified, but more on the management position. We are talking of the relative ratios. Mm-hmm. Today's statistics are the statistics, they are actually of 2011. In 2011, what has happened is they are more qualified than what they were at before 10 years, but most of them are on lower positions. So the management positions have come down, whether we talk of University of Guelph or overall Guelph. So will you be looking into this, or will you be? Are you aware of these statistics? Or
I hadn't heard that particular statistics, but I think it relates back to in part to the previous issue, which is qualifications from another part of the world. How are they recognized when you get to Ontario? I think the other thing, though, is that Canadian businesses don't always recognize that it's to their advantage to have a diverse management group, because if you have your customers are now a diverse customer base, it actually makes economic sense to have a diverse management group so that you can look at the needs of all those diverse customer base.
Thank you. Now, since you are part of the government, this question is not relating to education, but we know you are a very important minister. Actually, some people are saying that Liz actually is just like a premier, because you worked with her before. Your rapport with her is really good. I think not only in South Asian community, but overall, people are feeling that insurance companies, somehow they promise the government something, or they promise the public something, but at the same time they're not willing to really give any break to the people in the rates.
Yeah.
It's just a promise for the insurance company.
Well, we actually did make a commitment in the budget this spring 2013, that we would lower insurance rates on average by 15%. So we've been looking over the last few months at how can we do that. The Minister of Finance just announced, because we had said in the budget that couldn't just happen instantly, and the Minister of Finance just announced that for this first year, the target will be to reduce the rates on average by 8%, and then in this following year, then the target will obviously be to reduce the rates a further 7%. Part of that is there's probably a profit margin there that can be reduced. There's also some issues around, how many of the claims are fraudulent, and having a careful look at fraudulent claims. There's no doubt that Ontario has a higher accident claims record than any other province in Canada. So we need to look at not just the rates, but part of the story is the accident claims and the fraudulent claims, and looking at how do we reduce that. But when we put it all together, yes, absolutely, there's a commitment to reduce the rates.
Great. I want to ask you a personal question. Well, people say behind every success there is, or behind success there is somebody at the back, right? Somebody says that, it's the lady behind the man, or man behind the woman. So who is it? You know my question what it is. So what do you feel? Who's behind your success?
In terms of family, if you don't have a supportive family,
yeah.
And actually there's lots of times if my husband didn't feed me, I wouldn't eat. So, because I don't have any time to cook.
That's nice.
So that's just the practical course of staying
even being
alive.
a professor.
But there's actually, it's great to be able to take a little bit of time off now and again and go and play with grandchildren and things like that, because it actually does sort of ground you in terms of this is what real people are doing. But then the other thing is it's really important to have good staff, and I've always had great staff working for me here in the constituency office, and I have great folks working for me at the Ministry of Education. And because we make a lot of policy decisions, but then when you're in education, you go out into the school boards, and there's the teachers and the other education workers all across the province, and without them being part of the team, then nothing happens.